Hello again from Salford's Working Class Movement Library to our long-running series of Invisible Histories talks. Today we're very pleased to welcome back as our speaker library friend and historian Ali Ronan, who will use MI5 papers and other ephemera to piece together the life and times of socialist, anti-fascist and anti-war agitators Phillis and J. Allen Skinner. And as I always say at the start, the library's events are always free. However, we would like to encourage you to support us if you feel able to do so, and there is a donate button on our website. Okay, Ali, thanks very much. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. And how's that? Can people see that?
Great.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Well, I want to talk today about Phillis and Allen Skinner, who've been occupying my thinking over the last year or so. You could call them my lockdown couple. They were working class socialists, internationalists, pacifists, and vegetarians. And their story of activism seems to me also to be a love story, pure and simple. I'm constantly inspired by Phillis's exhortation that it is our duty clamourously and unceasingly to agitate, or as one of my friends said, perhaps it should be glamorously and unceasingly to agitate, which is quite nice. I downloaded recently the two large files. I'll show them to you. They're sort of massive of paper, files about the MI5 and Special Branch kept on them both from 1917 until the end of World War II. And it's these papers that form the basis of this talk today. There's so much that I don't know. I don't know so much about the Skinners, and I don't know very much about the politics of the 1920s and 30s. So anybody who knows lots more than me, and there'll be loads of you, I'm really happy to be in some kind of discussion with you. So this is very much a work in progress. I'm just going to change my settings, I think, so I don't have to look at myself. Oh, hang on, help. So of course, it's been a work of detection using things like letters that I've discovered, books and newspapers. So according to their daughter-in-law, Joy Skinner, Allen was a kind and gentle man. I'll just go back. This is the only image I have of Allen Skinner. And I have no image at all of Phillis, so I just imagine her. Allen was a kind, gentle, intelligent man, and Phillis was kind, very small, and she ran everywhere, turning up at the most unexpected moments. Her friend, Hope Squire, who's also left a huge cache of letters that she wrote to her conscientious objector husband, she's a friend of Phillis's, described her as quite amazing. And I just imagine her as brave. So years ago, when I was researching anti-war women in Manchester, I came across Mrs. Skinner. In my notebook, I jotted down that in March 1914, she joined the central branch of the Independent Labour Party, which held its meetings in the Clarion Cafe. Just another name on my list. I hardly noticed her at all. Then she turned up again as the editor of the local journal that was circulating in Manchester. I don't know if you can see that. I got these from America, where they very kindly copied them for me. They're lovely old Roneo papers. So I tried hard to find out who she was, but I couldn't find her. She was elusive. And then I realized that it was her husband, fellow socialist and pacifist Allen Skinner, who was arrested in Manchester as a CO in the autumn of 1916. So I began to search for them on the 1911 census, little realizing why I was unable to find them. And then a few years later, I noticed that a message had been posted on the Lives of the First World War site about Phillis Skinner. She'd been imprisoned as well in 1917. But at that point, I still couldn't find out much more. And to my shame, I didn't follow up the reference at that point. I asked for help from the family history team at Central Library. They were just amazing. The reason I couldn't find them on the census is that Phillis and Alan were not married in 1911. Phillis, who was 36, had been married to Ernest Watson, an optical lens maker, for 15 years, and she lived in Greenwich in London. Alan Skinner, who was 21, lived near her in Camberwell and worked as a postman. I don't know how they met. But the fact that Phillis lies almost continuously about her age also complicated matters for the family detective. The census was taken on the 2nd of April, 1911. And later that month, Alan Skinner moved to Siddle Street, which is here at the top, to take up a sorting job for the GPO. By January 1912, Ernest Watson was filing for divorce, citing Phillis's adultery and cohabitation in Manchester with Alan Skinner at number 1 Siddle Street. I don't know the story. Some people here, I think, are from a creative writing class, and I'm trying very hard to think about that. Here is their marriage certificate. I find this very interesting. I don't know how clearly you can see it, but she puts spinster on here. Phillis Skinner Watson, formerly Emerson, spinster. So that's in 1912. Ernest Watson almost immediately married a woman called Ethel Bailey, who was born in Camberwell but living in New York, working as a telephonist. And there's no further traces of him, so I guess he decamped to New York with Ethel. So Alan was a member of the ILP and the first secretary of the No Conscription Fellowship Greenhays branch in Manchester. He was imprisoned in 1916 after a court-martial at the Priest Heath training camp in Whitchurch, which you can see on the right there, and sentenced to 2 years hard labour in Wormwood Scrubs. Phillis went to see him and support him in the court-martial, staying with a sympathetic woman in Whitchurch whose letter to Phillis are in the MI5 file about her. But the interesting thing I then found out was that in 1915, Phillis had had a baby. And you can see here that they put the announcement in the Labour Leader. So I've got no idea what happened to the baby at this point. The baby does survive, and he goes on to have a very interesting life, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. But I imagine that he might very well have stayed in London for a while, because her friend Hope Squires says in 1918 that the baby is back with her. So in 1917, Phillis and her friend, her recently widowed friend Maud Hayes, went to Priest Heath to hand out leaflets as part of the Women's Peace Crusade. The women were planning to walk to London, as you do, to see Alan Skinner and Maud Hayes' sweetheart Edwin, known as Ted Rodway, who were both in Wormwood Scrubs. Both women were arrested and charged for contravening the Reg 27 of the Defence of the Realm Act. When she was arrested, Phillis was told the leaflets might cause a prejudiced feeling among the troops. And she replied, well, I suppose they would, and I hope they have. And that's why I think she was brave. And Alan too. The authorities in the MI5 papers recall, you will notice the trouble that Mrs. Skinner's husband, as a conscientious objector, has given the military at Priest Heath camp. They were sentenced to 3 months imprisonment in Strangeways. Questions were asked about in the House of Commons by the Quaker MP George Trevelyan about the severity of the sentence. And it's from this point that Phillis becomes known to the surveillance services. There's a huge amount of material about this about the arrest and all about this. And I could just have given this talk about this, but there's so much other interesting stuff that I wanted to share it. Recently, I've managed to contact Maud Rodway's granddaughter, and I've discovered Maud's amazing life story as well. Here's a picture of Maud and her husband, Ted, in the 30s. They're very, very interesting people. I'll give you just a tiny little snapshot. Born in 1886, Maud had a daughter. The daughter is here in the middle, Jane, who was born in 1903. And then she married the father, J.P. Hayes, but he went to work in Africa and he died in 1917. And that meant Maud was free to marry Ted Rodway. And they had 3 more children. And here she is. And although her trajectory took a different path than that of Phillis and Alan, I've just absolutely loved seeing one of these Peace Crusade women. And I have written a little blog about her. There's so much more to tell you, but that might be a whole other story. Oh, by the way, the daughter lived till she was 101. So that was great news as well. So Alan, Phillis and Maud were all released in 1917. And Alan was admitted to a sanatorium with arthritis and TB in his legs and arms. Phillis took over the editorship of the Conscientious Objectors Journal, and she was active in the NCF, the No Conscription Fellowship, and international anti-militarist work. And those things are also in the MI5 papers. Their son Jack was living with Phillis then, and in a book that his wife wrote, he recalled, in prison, my father contracted TB. Luckily, my mother was released and able to take him nourishing food. They were both vegetarians. She put me to bed in the afternoon with a tray of plasticine, hoping I would amuse myself, but I was too small to be left alone. And what sad grey little animals I made in those long afternoons. I think I wanted to put this in to kind of make us think about how hard it was for women who had children and who were doing all this activity and activism, how they actually lived their lives. I know that quite often then Jack would go and stay with Hope, but obviously that was a very difficult time. He would have been about 3.5 at that point. The Skinners moved back to London in the early 1920s. I'm not sure when, but they went to live in Putney. There's little trace of them in the archives, although you can track that some of the articles he's writing for the post office workers and some of the talks that he's giving are under surveillance and they are being mentioned in the papers. He stood unsuccessfully as the Labour Party candidate for Hendon in the 1924 United general election and for Clapham in 1929. So when they went back to London, this is just a little interesting thing, I think. Phillis sent Jack to a school that was in Chelsea, I think, across the river from Putney, and it's the Margaret Morris School. And it very much was a theatrical school, focusing on dance and other creative things, as well as kind of the 3 R's. And it turns out that Phillis volunteered in this school. So this might be why we don't see much of her in the archives at this point. But there was a really wide bohemian kind of milieu that the Margaret Morris School was attracting. People like Augustus John or Jacob Epstein, Catherine Mansfield. And they were also quite involved with the Labour Party at this time. But I have no idea whether the Skinners were involved and what their involvement was. Jack Skinner also was noticed at this point by Kirk Juice, who was running an experimental ballet company, having left Nazi Germany in the 30s. And he spent some time in Dartington Hall working with them and travelled with them during the beginning of the Second World War throughout South America. But he came back to stand before the military tribunal as a conscientious objector. And then he went to work in Addenbrooke's Hospital, and he stayed with an amazing woman in Cambridge called Alice Ronan. And she, again, has a whole history that goes about her that is another whole story, I guess. And Jack lived till about 1997, and he danced all his life. So he's quite scathing about his mother, or they think they find her very difficult, but she was by this time in her 60s or 70s. Why that should make us difficult, I don't know, as I'm that age. Perhaps it is. Perhaps we are difficult by now. Anyway, go back to Alan and Phillis. Alan was a founder member of the No More War movement, which was founded in 1921. And these meetings were absolutely under surveillance. So we have a lot of papers in this download that I did about people attending this and kind of reporting back. He was working with people that he would have known from Manchester, people like Fenner Brockway and Dick Wallhead, who of course lived in Burnage Gardens suburb for a while. And there were other CEOs like Wilfred Wellock, that people who've come from Nelson will know Wilfred. So there's this kind of network going on that I find absolutely extraordinary. He then also became very involved in something called the Meerut conspiracy case. And I know the papers for this are at the Working Class Movement Library, so I might have to book myself a seat when you're reopened. This was a controversial case that was initiated in India, and it was about trade unionists being unfairly imprisoned or arrested. And there were people in this campaign, people like Ellen Wilkinson and Harry Pollitt. So again, there's another network that's going on that the Skinners were involved in. Alan also helped to establish the Peace Pledge Union in 1932. During the 1930s, he was involved in the League Against Imperialism. He was involved always in the ILP, and there's an awful lot in the surveillance papers about what was happening in the ILP in the late 1920s and the early 30s, and the split from the Labour Party and the relationship with the Communist Party. And I really don't know enough about that, but I'm learning all the time. Anyone who knows, I'd love to hear from you and to have a discussion about that. I put Mabel Isles in because there aren't many women that I'm seeing. Mabel Isles seems to have been the woman that was, she's the secretary of the Pacifist Research Bureau. She seems to have been quite an interesting woman in her own right. So I just put her in as it's sort of coming up to International Women's Day. I want to remember that there are women behind a lot of these men. And I have this idea that possibly, because Phillis was editing the CO Journal in the late, in 1918 and 1919, she may very well have been working alongside Alan while he was writing for journals, the No War movement journals and things like that, but I don't know. So where was Phillis? In 1940, Special Branch describes the Skinner's flat, which I don't have a picture of, but I just chose this one, as lined with books on reference on war, anti-war and pacifism. I don't know. We know that they had meetings with the Peace Pledge Union there. We know that they were running tribunals, mock tribunals for conscientious objectors, but we really don't have very much material apart from what is in the MI5 papers. They describe Phillis as a strong-willed woman who to a great extent directs a policy which her husband expounds in his public speeches. Mrs. Skinner is not a public speaker. So I've got this idea that Phillis is there all the time, that she's busy, she's telling Alan, she's talking to Alan, she's working with him on what they're going to say. In 1940, the Metropolitan Police, in a letter to a Colonel Allen of the GPO, describes Skinner himself as an ardent pacifist who's come under the notice of Special Branch on a number of occasions. He's a speaker and chairman at the Police Pledge Union. He's a member of the Central Board of Conscientious Objectors. He's in close touch with several members of the ILP, the Fellowship of Reconciliation, and the No Conscription League. There is no doubt that he's opposed to the policy of the present government, and neither he nor his wife hesitate to express their views on pacifism and the British government. A large part of the PPU's work involved providing for the victims of war. They'd sponsored a house where Basque children from the Spanish Civil War were cared for. They were also working very closely with refugees from Germany and Austria. And we know, as the that letter said earlier that Skinner was serving as an advisor to the Central Board. And from the early years of 1941, the Skinners bought a small cottage in Carr Green in Cornwall as a refuge or a potential refuge for conscientious objectors. I have been in touch with the archives down there, but they don't seem to know anything about this. So I've really learned this from the book that Joy Skinner wrote, who was Jack Skinner's wife. But we know also from papers here that that cottage itself was under surveillance because a lot of PPU, Police Pledge Union material was sent there, and they were obviously using that as I don't know, some kind of place where they would discuss policy and things. And so the police in Cornwall, there's quite a lot of correspondence about them setting up observations on the Skinners. Phillis died in 1950. Joy Skinner implies that she had cancer. We know that she was on her way. She died in Exeter, so I'm wondering whether she was on her way to Saltash. I don't know. I don't know what happened to the cottage. She was 76 at that point. And Alan, now 60, retired from the Union, and from that time he seems to have devoted his life to absolute pacifist work, working for Peace News, and very involved in some of the very early direct action campaigns against nuclear weapons. He became a member of the Direct Action Committee. The Peace News offices in London were used as a base for the committee, and there were various people. I think what I find very interesting about this is that kind of a real web of the old guard, if you like, the old conscientious objectors, but also it seems to be a real international movement at this time. I know there was international work going on before, but you can really clearly see it now. The same direct action group formed the Aldermaston March Committee in 1957, and they marched to Aldermaston, as we know. In the late 50s, they began a campaign against the construction of rocket bases in Britain. So it brings back lots of memories of Greenham and things like that. And Alan was arrested in 1960 for campaigning outside the Harrington rocket base near Rothwell. So again, this is kind of non-violence, the beginning of non-violence, direct action, and what the Direct Action Committee had said: this action will run the risk of injury or of arrest for refusing to move or obstructing the police in the course of their duty. As a result, you may have to serve a term of imprisonment. And so he was imprisoned. He spent his 70th birthday in prison. And after that, I can't really find out very much about him. So perhaps a spell in prison was just a bit too much. But then just recently, I've been in touch with a couple of old CND activists, Michael Randall, some people might know, who wrote to me and said, I got to know Alan well during the period I worked at Peace News in the late 1950s, and again in the period in the early 60s, when I lodged with Hugh and Eileen Brock about October 1960, and Alan lived in the top flat of the same house at 79 Lordship Park, Stoke Newington. I had a huge respect for him and was greatly influenced by his views. In the early 1970s, I recorded an interview with him about his experience as a CO during World War I, when I was working for the General Studies Department of Bradford Regional College of Art. I included it in a collection of interviews with World War conscientious objectors entitled The Other Veterans. But he's still looking for this, and sadly, I haven't got a copy yet. Alan died in 1974 in hospital. Jack and Joy visited him a few days earlier, and Joy wrote that the forlornness and acceptance of finality in his eyes still haunt me. I'm working through various archives to try and build up a much more nuanced pictures of the Skinners after they left Manchester in 1920. But I hope I've given you enough material for us all to remember Phillis and Alan Skinner, the forgotten agitators of the 20th century. I've become very fond of the strong-willed woman and the quiet but determined man and their enduring love story. Thank you. Ooh, I don't know.
Thank you. We can change that. Oh, no, I think we're still seeing your screen.
Oh, okay.
I need to. Oh, I can probably do that. Yes, there you go.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. What an unusual couple, and still so much to discover about them. So that's intriguing, isn't it? Right. Does anybody have any comments, or indeed any more news? Any more news of the Skinners? That would be great, wouldn't it?
Yes, if anyone's got anything about them or knows much more about my knowledge of 1920s and 1930s is, you know, a bit patchy at the moment.
We've got various people here who are sort of members of our exhibition team who are we are still aiming for an exhibition about the 20s and 30s, which was due to be happening last year, but that's only on temporary hold, we hope. So you'll be able to find out more about the 20s and 30s at some stage in the library, Ali and others. Here's something from Alan. Alan, do you? If I can find Alan, he might want to unmute himself. Alan, where are you? Too many people. It's lovely to have so many of you here. I just can't find Alan. Where are you? There's so many people. He must be somewhere, probably waving at me frantically. I'm not finding him. How strange. Anyway, okay. While I'm looking for him, can you see what's in the chat there, Ali?
Let me have a look.
It's
Alan was part of the ultra leftist, yes, in that, yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes, Alan, please email me if you can, or get in touch with me via the Working Class Movement.
There he is. Here we are. Hello, Alan. Sorry, there. Yes, go on. Tell us more. We know you love mini palaces, so tell us more.
Yeah. What I would say to Ali is that there's a guy called Bill Hetherington, who is the
archivist of the
Peace Pledge Union.
Yeah.
And he will be able to really give you all of the background, because he was incredibly helpful to me. His knowledge of the peace movement way beyond. I mean, he's an incredible historian. So
okay, yes,
yeah, I
do know him, but I've never sort of talked about him about anything specific. So thank you very much.
And they've also got a really good photo archive, which has photos of many palaces there. So I mean, there's boxes and boxes and boxes of pacifist photos going back to the 30s. So you might well be fortunate.
Yeah. One of the things I found quite interesting was that he seems to be very suspicious of the communists. If you're saying he's kind of very much of the left, but he certainly wasn't. He doesn't seem to have been very keen on the ILP being absorbed into the Communist Party.
Yeah. In the 1930s, the ILP had two areas in two parts. One around pacifism. The one lot was supporting the League of Nations Union, and he was in the other half. And many Palestinians were supportive of the League of Nations Union, and they were very narrow and sectarian in the way. The minutes are either in Friend's House or in Peace Pledge Union. So I've gone through the minutes of the 1930s, and it's their sectarianism is really, really clear there, as it becomes in the journal from 1935. When he's the editor.
That's really helpful.
And you'll just see that he is so antagonistic to anybody who doesn't share his really narrow line.
Wow.
It been for your description of him, because he as gentle and kind.
I don't know.
In the way as the editor of the journal, he was quite brutal.
Okay. I think Phillis might have been quite brutal as well, actually, in her views. But that is so helpful. Thank you.
Perhaps Lynette could be good enough for us to share our mutual emails, and then we can.
That would be great.
Not bore others now anymore here.
Yeah.
No, but that's interesting, and so he was Minnie Palliser's nemesis at one stage, Alan. So
Well, I mean, they were just on different sides of the fence. By then, I mean, she'd been an ILP organizer, and I guess from the First World War, they would have been like-minded all the way through. But then at the end of the 1920s, when the ILP started to split, whether they should affiliate to the Labour Party or not, and then their interpretations of what the cause of war was, all those things meant that they took different sides of the fence. I suspect, I just looked at my notes while Ali was speaking, I don't have them down for the 40s and 50s, but I suspect they came back together and would have worked together in the Second World War. They both would have opposed the Second World War, and they both would have been very active in the PPU and the CND, I guess, at the end of the 50s. But I only have him written into my text in the 1930s.
Thank you very much.
Right, great. See, always something you as part of our talks. Isn't that great? Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. Glad to have you here. Always glad to have you here, but particularly with this one. So a short question from Steve Roman. When did the Skinners live in Mulders Road in Manchester?
I think they must have moved there in 1916, probably after the birth of Jack. So I look at the house now, it's quite a big house. So I've always wondered about, money and what they were living on, really. But then when I looked at this older picture, I think I've got it in one of those slides. It's obviously a flat above a shop at that time. So it's number 143 Mulders Road. And they were there probably for 4 years till 1920, I guess. And very sadly, number 1 Siddle Street has been demolished. I don't know why, otherwise I would be putting a little plaque on it, but there, yeah.
Do we have anybody else who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Please wave at me if you would like me to unmute you. I will try and scroll my way through. Having lost Alan before, I don't want to miss anybody else out. Tricia, do you have a question? Do you want to unmute yourself?
It's a silly question, really, but do we know what they sounded like? What were their voices like, or their accents?
I don't know. I mean, I guess they're very London because they both come from London. And I've got some of the writings. I've got some of her writings. So I guess she's a bit flowery, but I don't know. I mean, I've got no idea. And it's very frustrating not having any images of them either, because the image I've got of Alan is when he's an older man. But I guess, like Alan was saying, there probably are images of him in something like the PPU archive or at Bradford or somewhere like that.
What about prison records? Do they have any?
Oh,
I'm sure you've tried that. Yeah.
I've tried. The woman, I've got a young woman who lives opposite me who works in Strangeways. Yeah, and I keep badgering her to see what there is, but she clearly isn't that. So I might have to really go to Strangeways one day and do a bit of finding out.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
So it was wonderful to find the picture of Maud, because that gave me an idea of these are just young women. Maud was only 30 when she was imprisoned. No, Phillis was about 40. But we don't, these photographs are so rare at this point during the war. Thank you.
So, have you been in contact with Jack, says Linda?
Well, sadly, he died in 1997. But I did, as I say, find the book that his partner had written, or his wife, which is somewhere about, which is this book, because they had a kind of magic carpet dance that they used to do. So this is where I've got some of the information from. But as I say, it's mostly about them and mostly about what they were doing in the 1950s, 60s. Yeah. Yeah. How common are the MI5 cases?
Oh, yes. Okay. So yes.
I know the Strangeways records have been lost, but I was just really hoping, as you do, that there might just be just be there. Tell us.
A couple of questions about the MI5 records. So yes, can you tell us more?
Yeah. They come up, and to be honest, I had put off looking at them because I thought they would just be a little bit about the arrest. So I never imagined they would be this much. So they come up like this. They are named. They've got Phillis Annie Skinner and James Allen. And I think it's terrible, Alan, isn't it? Because you don't remember every minute, everything you do. But my memory is that last year I typed in their name into their search engine, and this is what came up. And it's a lot of papers, yeah. So there is one archive absolutely about the arrest in 1917, and it becomes very clear that they want to put Phillis and Maud into prison as an example. And you can see this kind of correspondence between the police and the military about how they're going to go about that. But the interesting thing as well for me was these letters from local women in Whitchurch who were putting up Phillis and Maud, and they're talking about reading the Labour leader, talking about they don't absolutely believe the propaganda that's going on. They're talking about things that are happening like the Leeds Convention. So there's something about these local people who are in touch with all kinds of other movements. The woman who gave them a lift to the camp in her donkey cart, they decided not to imprison her because she was a local woman. They didn't want to upset local people, it seems. And she kind of said, I wasn't certain what all these leaflets were. But Phillis said to the police, well, I do this in Manchester all the time. I'm handing out leaflets. I don't get into any trouble there. So that was another interesting thing as well, that there might have been very well-known activists in certain cities that the police just kind of went, oh, there they go again, you know.
And Helen wondered how common these MI5 records are.
I don't know. I also printed off, while I was there, I printed off, there's a huge stash for Emmanuel Shinwell, if you remember him, which I haven't looked at, but they're there. And also for Corder Catchpole, who is another CO that people will have heard of. So those are the three that and also a Welsh minister, I think it's called Nicholas. So these are quite detailed, but they're just there waiting until I have another lockdown, presumably.
There was something that the National Archives have put a lot of material available publicly online, haven't they, during lockdown, which presumably will disappear again behind a paywall at some stage, but it's still
it was
available.
£3 to download it, so it's not very much money. That's it. Thank you, Alan. Thank you. Yeah. So there's a huge, if you're interested, we could talk about that because there's a big surveillance thing for him. And Emmanuel Shinwell that many of us will remember from our youth many years ago. Yeah. Yes, and
as somebody comments, but the ones that are being compiled now, but yes, we don't know about. Yes. Hello, MI5, if you're here. Yes.
Well, that's the other thing. The Hope Squire letters, which are just extraordinary. She does talk about seeing the detective. They know who he is, when he's at meetings. So they're kind of like, they kind of wave to them, I think, or they say, here he is, don't say too much. So yeah, they're quite fairly shameless, I think, about watching them. Was that something from Janet? I just missed that.
It's a comment about how attitudes to children of activists have shifted, maybe. WLM insisted on childcare as part of activist meetings.
Absolutely. So I think this is a really interesting thing. I would like to think of Phillis obviously as endlessly kind and generous, but actually we know that she left Jack quite a lot. And we also know that anecdotally, Anna Robinson left her children with a dog to look after them. So while she was out campaigning. So I think this whole thing about childcare and what happens and what was happening to children in the early 20th century is quite interesting, you know.
Yes, your plasticine anecdote is a very sad one, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yes.
it is very sad, yeah. Very sad indeed.
Folks, do you have anything else you would like to add? I'm scanning to see. Lois, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I was just reminded of Randall Swingler, who we had a talk about by Andy Croft through the working class movement. Now, he was closely followed by MI5 as a left-wing activist, as well as being a poet, up to, I think, his death in the 70s. And I was wondering, I don't know if anybody will know, whether the fascists were followed as assiduously as these other people.
That's
you
very
know,
interesting.
who very ordinary people. I mean, they weren't big political names. Yeah.
I think that's quite interesting. I think probably the answer is probably in the 30s, they probably were followed, because we know a number of fascists were imprisoned at the beginning of the Second War.
That's true, yes, yeah. But that was like
Um,
Mosley, yes, who was
yes,
in her, yeah.
And, you know, you've got the wonderfully named, what was she called, Nora, who stood in the 1918 election. So I don't know. I think that would be very interesting about how people are surveyed and what the kind of motivations are, or how they're treated as well, how they may be treated differently. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lois. Anybody else? Lydia, to unmute yourself. Can't hear you.
Right.
There we go.
Yeah, can you? We're watching it together. It's Pam here, Pam Flynn.
Oh, hello, Pam. So it is. Yes, hello.
Yeah, it's all right. What interests me about the history that we're looking at here is that Alan Skinner is part of the early history of CND, and it has taken a very long time, but nuclear weapons are now illegal as a result of the passage of the treaty, the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which came into force worldwide last month. And the 9 nuclear states, of course, don't recognise this treaty and have no intention of signing it. And sadly, John Healey of the Labour Party has recently said that nuclear weapons are non-negotiable. The Labour Party's commitment to nuclear weapons and to NATO is non-negotiable. So we're in a sticky place at the moment. But if we look at the history of the modern history of the Skinners, I think what we can see, as well as the contradictions about the difficulty of looking after children, we can see the heroic example, really, of people who just stick at it until they win. They were spied upon. They probably knew they were being spied upon. They stuck at it. And it really is a never give up scenario. And I just wanted also to comment on Janet's point about childcare. The early women's liberation movement, and in fact, adult education centres in the 1980s, right through the 1980s, adult education centres did their very best to offer childcare and creche care for people returning to education. And it all got sacrificed, unfortunately, to austerity. And these days, if you want to try and set up childcare, safeguarding regulations, which of course it is right that we safeguard children, but the creche is very, very much more difficult to organise. So just those 2 points really about stickability and dealing with contradictions.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Pam. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you.
And those are good things to ponder as we end, perhaps, unless anybody wants to do a final
thank you so much.
at me. I think we are. Yeah, we're getting some virtual applause here, Ali. I'm sorry it's virtual, but yes, hopefully you can see it in all the little squares. So
that's nice.
So yeah, no, that is great. Great to have had you here. So next week, folks, on the Wednesday, the 10th of March at the same time, we'll be celebrating International Women's Day with a talk by Sarah Pedersen on the Scottish suffragettes, and we do hope you can join us then. We record our talks, as you know, so if you can't join us then the talk will be uploaded, as this one will, to our YouTube channel shortly. That's youtube.com/WCM Library. And a final reminder that our talks are, as usual, free. However, we would like to encourage you to support the library if you're able to do so, and there's a donate button on our website. Thanks again, and goodbye till the same time next week. Take care, in solidarity. Very best wishes from all at the Working Class Movement Library. Goodbye.